Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappelle. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers.
On this episode of the podcast, we are discussing Jordan Peele's Nope. You can support the podcast on Patreon, where you can read the queries we critique, plus get loads of other bonus content, including monthly writing chats with us, the best editors in the world, and the most adorable Story Chat Radio stickers. It's easy to find. Just go to patreon.com/storychatradio. And don't forget, our podcast is now available on YouTube. And we have our very own personalized handle now. You can find us under @StoryChatRadio, and the link is on our site and the link tree on our social media as well.
All right, here come the spoilers. When Otis Haywood Sr. is killed by a falling coin, presumed to have fallen out of an airplane, his children OJ and M inherit his business, training and handling horses for film and TV. They struggle to keep it afloat and sell some of the horses to a nearby Western theme park. One night, the Haywoods' electricity fluctuates and their horses react violently. They discover a flying saucer has been taking their horses and then spitting out the inorganic matter, a piece of which caused their father's death. Seeing an opportunity to save the ranch, the Haywoods decide to film the UFO in hopes of selling the footage. They don't get clear footage, but when they notice a nearby cloud that never moves, they realize that the UFO is using the cloud as camouflage. Not long after, the UFO devours an entire audience at the Western Park, and OJ deduces that the UFO is not a spaceship, but an organism that eats anything that looks directly at it. He thinks they can use horse training methods to lead the UFO and get the footage of it without being killed. The Haywoods hire a famous cinematographer for assistance, who brings a hand-cranked film camera that won't be affected by the electricity fluctuations. The group lures the creature out and gets the footage, but the cinema photographer is eaten along with his camera. The creature unfurls into a jellyfish-like form. OJ draws it away from M, allowing her to rush to the Western Park, where she untethers a giant balloon mascot. The creature attempts to feed on the balloon while M uses a wishing well attraction's analog camera to get their photographic evidence. The balloon pops, seemingly killing the creature, with the picture as proof of the creature's existence and reporters arriving nearby. M sees an unharmed OJ on horseback outside of the park. So, Jenny, what did you think of the movie?
So I'm starting to think I will always love anything that Jordan Peele makes.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen Us. Is that the name of the one? I haven't seen that one.
I don't remember. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. My husband says he thinks that's the best and maybe the scariest of the three. So.
Oh, man. You're going to make me do it, aren't you?
Maybe at some point.
Okay.
Yeah, so you know how we're always talking about understanding what your audience will expect, like what they're going to bring to the story. I feel like he's such a master of that. Like he really draws on this whole history of movies in such a brilliant way. Like I see Steven Spielberg influences and M. Night Shyamalan and Orson Welles, but I feel like Jordan Peele takes those and makes them into something new that really feels like modern society and not a cliche idea of what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a master of understanding the impact of tropes, I guess is what I'm saying. So I really enjoyed his sparing use of a score as well. And I had read that some people struggled with OJ as a character, like finding him really difficult to connect with. But I actually felt like he was such a classic stoic character and that the actor did a really amazing job pulling it off. Sort of perfect for like a modern cowboy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm also learning to ride a motorcycle to my list of like necessary life skills, just in case I'm ever in a situation where needing that information might save my life. Because that was my first thought when like M gets on the motorcycle and rides away. I was like, well, I'd just be screwed.
Also, maybe add riding a horse. Can you ride a horse?
I mean, sort of, but I don't have to balance a horse.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I think it would depend on how well trained the horse was. Yeah. So anyway, so my favorite thing I think about it though is that I really love that the aliens are so inhuman. Like,
Yeah.
I can't think of another alien movie that has done that so well. Like, again, tropes. And I think it really adds to the overall mystery and tension of the story. I did struggle with some of the world building. I found some of the characters' deductions to kind of come out of nowhere, despite showing all these little flashbacks to how they arrived at that conclusion. So, like, the leaps in logic were a little much to me and didn't always completely connect. But I often find that to be the case in horror movies and am willing to overlook it for what I thought was otherwise a very enjoyable story. What did you think?
I really, really liked it. I hate scary movies, and yet all the ones we've watched I've been really into. So maybe I don't hate them. I don't know.
You just need specific scary movies.
I need specific scary movies.
Yeah.
I didn't like it as much as Get Out.
Yeah.
But it was great. And I'm surprised to hear about the OJ stuff. I actually kind of really connected with him.
Yeah.
I thought he was great and like good at showing that he wasn't just quiet. He wasn't just stoic. He was like uncomfortable and nervous. Like,
Right.
especially in that opening scene when he is on set with the horse and like waiting for his sister and having to give this big speech. And like, I thought that was like really, really good.
Yeah.
I felt like he had a lot of depth that was very subtle, but very brilliantly done. I'm also kind of obsessed with the design of the alien.
Right?
It was just really cool, like
It
from
really
a saucer into that jellyfish kite thing.
Yeah.
It was so cool. And I do love the idea of it being an animal and not like the upper level thinking that we expect aliens to have.
Right.
And I do really like their plan for the big showdown at the end. I thought it was really fun and clever. I liked the wacky waving, arm flailing tube men.
Yes, it was a lot of fun.
All that being said, I was a little confused as to why they were so determined to do what they did.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to really want to get the footage, and it's another thing to go to the lengths that they went to, especially after blood was poured all over their house.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like maybe that's the point where you might just call the government and or something. I don't know. I know that's a lot of, like, white girl privilege right there, but it just felt like, I don't know. I was a little, like, I wanted to understand, or I wanted more incentive for them to need that footage, I guess.
Like, at that point in the story, it did kind of seem like that's where they raised the stakes. And so there should have been that element of, like, now we need to do this even more for X reason.
And we were
and
missing
I
the
agree. It sort of
recommitment.
feels like that was missing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I kind of wanted a little bit more of a conclusion, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point was to get great footage. And they got the shot from the well. But that was kind of it. And I feel like the cinematographer got the amazing shot. Or at least I want to know that he did. And I would assume the alien would spit the film back out.
Yeah.
And they
Or
could
like it kind of
find
looked like it like exploded. So like wouldn't it
Yeah.
just like yeah.
Like,
No,
I wanted
agree.
them to find that film.
Yes.
And, like, the whole impetus of this motivation was, like, they want to get on Oprah. I mean, not so literally, but,
Sure.
like, did they get on Oprah? Like, did
Right.
they get the thing that they want?
Right.
Like, in order for this motivation to feel real, I needed a conclusion to the motivation, and I felt like I didn't get one.
I can see that. I mean, it really did end very abruptly.
Very abruptly.
'Cause it's
I needed
not just-
another couple minutes, I think.
Yeah, and it's not even just like, did they get what they needed, but were they like also implicated in all of these people being murdered?
Right.
And like all of the destruction that happened at this Western park, and like all of this other stuff that happened.
Exactly. Like, that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought when it rained all of their blood and stuff on their house that people were going to assume they did it.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I felt
That
like there were
was-
some cool threads that didn't get
So I feel
finished.
like overall this was not a super scary horror movie.
It
I
was
felt
not.
like it was more of like a science fiction movie
Yeah.
with horror elements. And it's part of why, like when we were kind of, making out the notes for the show, I was like, so what genre would I call this? Because so there's this segment through the middle where they show the full footage of what happened in the 80s sitcom or like the 90s sitcom. Mm-hmm. That was intense. It was really, I don't know, I would say exactly scary, but it was very intense. And I think
It was very tension.
Yeah, there was a lot of tension. I think there was a lot of heightened emotion in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
You can really feel the fear of the character, even though it doesn't feel like horror exactly.
Yeah.
But then going from that pretty much straight into the scene where it's like dumping all the blood on the house, that was like a freaking haunted house movie for that scene. That part I thought was really scary.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like the rest of the movie was actually super scary.
I didn't think it was scary at all. I also did watch it in the morning with some coffee.
Yeah, smart.
So that probably helped. So I have some criticisms in that I wanted
Sure.
more from it.
Yes.
I wanted like a couple more minutes. But also that does, to its credit, be like, I did want more.
Yes.
And I did really enjoy it. Like, I really liked the characters. I definitely could have used more of an explanation of how he knows it was a beast and not
Yes.
intelligent. That was where I felt that connection or that deduction wasn't quite there. But I just
Yes.
was happy enough to go along with it.
I do worry a little bit that we might be moving in the direction of like M. Night Shyamalan and like maybe making not such great movies, but
It's still
it was still
solid.
a really good movie. It was still
Yes.
a really good movie. Just, yeah. I do think maybe a little bit they were trying too hard to be clever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's such a cool idea. And I
It
feel
is.
like it needed
to
a
me-
little bit more time.
To
with
me,
it.
I feel like it balanced out, but it also kind of felt like maybe there was like another 10 minutes worth of footage that they ended up needing to cut to keep the movie to
Exactly.
a certain length that would
That's
have made
exactly
some of
what it
those
felt
things
like.
connect better.
But I did love it. So
I may have had a very long conversation with my husband afterwards about like if this was a manuscript that I got, how I might
it
have suggested they edit it differently than they did.
Yeah.
But that's not the point of this conversation.
I think it's one of those, like, if I got this as a manuscript, I would be like, this is freaking awesome and I
Yeah.
love it. Here's how we could make it like really connect better.
Yeah.
Because it needed something, I think. But
Right.
it was still good. All right, so now that we've overanalyzed the movie, Jenny, what's something this movie does well that writers can use in their own work?
Okay, so we're going to talk about some like next level kind of writing stuff here.
Cannot wait.
I know. So I think it's a really great example of motif. Like this is a word that always makes me feel super fancy when I
So
talk about it in
fancy.
writing as opposed to like interior design. So a motif is pretty simple, but it's related to a lot of other things. So I think it can get really confusing for writers. But it struck me that this movie had several motifs and that some of them really work with each other and with the themes and other story elements. So to me, I think the biggest motif was like the cowboy western / western movie kind of thing. In a lot of ways, that really kind of ties everything else together, I think. So like the main characters live on a ranch and with these incredible desert vistas that feel very isolated and lonely, which incidentally makes for a fabulous backdrop for horror.
It was gorgeous.
It is. But I think that for a lot of like modern alien people, like the desert and aliens kind of go hand in hand for like Area 51. So there's that. And then, yeah, I think OJ has this like big cowboy energy too. Like he
so
is
does.
all stoic and he like lives by the code his daddy taught him. And, I could definitely see him like, maybe not, but like I feel like whatever the modern equivalent of like eating at a campfire would be, he would do that.
Yep.
So then there's like the Western theme park nearby that has this more playful and very commercial look at that motif with like cartoon cowboys and sequin costumes and lots of fringe. And then, of course, the main characters train horses, which gives us big Western vibes. So it all contributes to this other, or like the horses also contribute to this other big motif, which is animals. There's a lot of focus on the horses, especially the one named Lucky, but there's also all of the flashbacks to the chimpanzee actor who played Gordy in the sitcom Jupe was in as a kid. So I think there's also maybe like a motif with eyes.
Yes.
And that's something that includes like cameras as an avatar for eyes as well.
Totally.
Yeah, so I think motif is something that this movie does really well and that maybe isn't as like super subtle as it is in a lot of other movies. So it's easier to pick up on.
So we've said the word motif a lot. Why don't we talk about what it actually is?
Let's not. Okay. Let's just leave them guessing.
We could just not and just figure it out from context.
Yeah, perfect.
So motif often gets confused with just like symbolism or theme. Is it just one of those? It's really confusing. Symbolism is more about an aspect that stands for something else. So like, oh God, I lost all symbols from my head. A red rose representing love.
Sure.
Theme is about the message and the general like vibe of a story a little bit. Like, what are you trying to tell with your story? But motif, I think, is what ties the two together. So the big thing that separates a motif from a lot of other terms is that it repeats. Mm-hmm. That's basically all it is. It's pretty simple. It's repetitive symbols. But somehow it remains very elusive and confusing to a lot of people, myself included. So a symbol can be a one-off thing while a motif is repeated. It takes a symbol and repeats it throughout the work, and through its repetition, it expresses the theme of the story. So this movie is all about taming beasts, and the motif of eye contact reflects and expresses that theme. Honestly, the whole Gordy flashback is a way to fully just show that motif.
Right. And then we see that like multiple times. Just the flashback itself is repeated.
Yeah, and like get more and more info each time.
Yeah.
So motifs are often symbols that appear at key moments throughout the story as well. So whenever the beast attacks, it's because of eye contact. We get long shots focused on the eyes of a character or even the beast itself. When Gordy is done attacking and sees Jupe, the camera really focuses in on their eyes and them gazing at each other for a very long time back and forth. So basically, to repeat myself, motifs are symbols that repeat and point to a theme within the story. I think that's clear. I don't know. But there it is. That's what it is.
I think it's pretty clear. Okay, so let's go a little deeper with that then. So how do motifs work in writing? Mm-hmm. Most stories don't have motifs quite as overt as this movie does, which is why I thought, again, this would be a great example.
It's such a good example.
So let's look again at the animal motif in this movie. So the theme is really about, I think, sort of the dangers of exploitation for entertainment. Mm-hmm. We see this in the flashbacks with Gordy, showing how he was pushed too far past his threshold, and that's why he attacks. We see it with Lucky, where he's on the set and kicks at people who don't listen to the safety rules OJ gave them, which, like, can't feel bad for them. The movie even uses the names of the horses to create sections of the story, almost like chapters. Mm-hmm. And then I think what makes this really successful is that it feels like watching it takes what feels like disparate storylines and brings them together thematically. So when I first started watching this, I was like, what does any of this have to do with the chimpanzee? Because you see that like at the very beginning and you're like, what does that have to do with any of the rest of this? Basically?
Yeah, I was waiting for it to be connected more to the alien.
Right. But then all of these elements tie into the realization that the alien isn't a ship, but an animal, like an organic creature, and that they could try to treat it like the horses they're training. The really brilliant aspect, I think, is that the movie doesn't have like a neat way to tie up all of this in like a neat little bow. From a moralistic standpoint. Like the main characters still get their photograph. They still make a spectacle of this animal. They still exploit it for their own benefit. Okay, but to bring all of this back to the animal motif, there are plenty of ways the filmmakers could have expressed this theme differently. So like they could have shown a celebrity having a meltdown instead. They could have had the alien transform earlier, or they could have had the characters observe some other behavior that would show its animal characteristics. But this animal motif allowed them to tie together other elements. So like it creates a link between the Hollywood TV and film industry, the aliens, and the Western park. And it ties the characters together in ways that they don't even fully see, but that the audience gets to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, it connects all the various themes and differentness. All right. That was a nothing sentence, but you know what I'm trying to say.
You're trying to say, yes, Jenny, you're right.
Yes, Jenny, you're right. How do you identify a motif? Motif. I keep saying teeth. I don't know why. I'm having a day. So you just look for it.
Oh, perfect.
And then you've identified it. Done. But seriously, it's one of the best ways to identify a motif is to start with the theme. So what is this movie trying to tell you? And once you know that, you can ask yourself, how is it showing you this theme? Often it's about paying attention to small details and noticing repeated moments or devices. What does a piece of literature or a movie continually come back to? This one focuses a lot on animals and eyes and even like balloons and kites. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it needs to be something that adds up greater than the sum of its parts. So a motif takes the repeated imagery and makes it into something more. You aren't just seeing a lot of eyes in this movie because the characters have eyes. There's a meaning behind the focus. So there are a lot of shoes in this movie too, but that's because people wear shoes. It's not a motif. So all the shoes combined are equal to the sum of their parts, whereas the eyes add up to more. If that makes sense. I'm getting into math imagery and that's not my strong suit. So there aren't just animals in this movie because they are important to the action. They are there to show you something. So anyway, I find it personally easiest to work backwards with motifs of here's this theme. Why do I know that this theme is here? But everyone's brain works differently. So you can do the other way and look for common symbols or other sort of repeated imagery. And then from there, extrapolate the motif. Whatever works best for you and your brain is the way to do it, basically.
Nice. Yeah, I think I learned to look for the symbols first. So I like kind of taking it. I like your way of taking it like kind of backwards from the theme instead. Yeah. I think that actually makes a lot more sense.
Oh, thank you.
So one thing I want to point out is that unlike a lot of elements we've discussed on the podcast, a strong intentional motif is not necessary to every story. Mm-hmm. Like you have to have characters of some sort. Something has to happen in every story. As a side note, listeners, this is not a challenge. You don't have to prove to anyone that a story can be written without characters or a plot.
Jenny, oh no. Now we're going to get that. People are going to be like, here it is. I wrote it.
Anyway, so your story doesn't have to have a motif at all. And if it does, it can be, and usually is, much more subtle. Some classic examples from other movies are like the red balloon in It, or like the Terminator saying, "I'll be back."
Yeah.
Even the score in Star Wars creates a motif because there's, like specific songs that go with specific characters through the whole series. And that repeated element is what adds layers of significance. And that's really the heart of a motif, is that repeated element adding layers. So how do you know if your story would benefit from a stronger motif? I think a lot of that has to do with how much you want to emphasize the theme of your story. Because a motif expresses the theme and supports it, it's going to bring more attention to that theme and make it a bigger focus for your reader. I also want to mention that while a motif does have to support the theme in order to be a motif officially, it doesn't have to only support the theme. Like, it can also enhance the mood or the tone. It can act as foreshadowing. In other words, a motif can have multiple functions within a story, which, as you know, I'm a big fan of having single elements that do multiple jobs in a story.
That's just efficiency.
Right.
So how do you decide on a motif and include one into your story? You want to start with the existing elements. What is your story about? Basically, not just, it is about a guy on a horse farm being attacked by an alien, but more of, it is about the exploitation of animals and the danger inherent in the wild. Once you kind of know the theme or message of your story, you can go back in and see what points to that theme, what already exists in your story that you can include in other major moments. So in theory, and if it were a book, the author of Nope could have written about not looking the beast in the eyes. And then they could have gone back in and put in references to eyes at key moments, like including eyes on all the wacky waving, arm flailing tube men. Adding in the mirror where Lucky looks into his own eyes and then kicks out. Maybe originally someone got into his personal space or was too loud. But by using the mirror where he makes eye contact with himself, you have an eye causing a major plot point. So look at your big moments and see if there is a natural way to incorporate your motif. But make sure you do it in very varying and subtle ways. So if you have a fire motif, you don't want a house burning down every time there's a major plot point. You can have like candles flickering in the background, casting shadows on someone's face. Or the characters can go to a bonfire beach party or whatever it is that youths do nowadays. Find different ways to explore and like hint at your motif. Nope isn't just a bunch of shots of eye contact. It puts eyes in different places, on non-living balloons, in mirrors, in pictures, in the use of a camera, like Jenny was saying, etc. And eyes are a great way to show exploitation as well as bestial dominance. They aren't an overly obvious way to express those themes, but they still do it.
Right. And it's because it ties directly into the story. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. So I feel like that brings us into talking about how not to do motifs too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And because I do feel like the biggest pitfall is when it comes to motif is artificially imposing one that doesn't really work for the story.
Yeah.
Maybe because it deals with symbolism, it can feel gratuitous or even derivative when a motif isn't handled well. It's really important to make sure that your motif focuses on something that already exists in the story for other reasons, like Carly was just saying. So I'm going to keep going with the eye motif. There's the literal looking at the aliens, and then the concept of like the quote unquote eyes of the world. These already exist in the story. So adding to it with the cartoon eyes of the sky dancers, which is apparently what these are called. And
That
I had
sounds
no
fake.
idea that that's what they were called. Like those like inflatable wavy thingies. They said it in the movie. They said it in the movie. That was how I found out.
I think they're
And then I
wacky
Googled
waving,
it.
arm flailing tube men.
That's the brand name, Carly.
I see. That's fair. That's fair.
Anyway, and then the inflatable mascot towards the end makes sense within the context of the rest of the story. That's the point. Not what they're called, but the point is that they make sense within the context of the story. So it doesn't feel like it's an afterthought that someone just tried to slap on to like try to make the point. You can also risk taking a motif too far and pulling readers out of the story. So you never want to get to the point where a reader is like, we get it, just stop with the symbols already. And then I think there's also the potential for falling into stereotypes and cliches. So for example, if a theme is about good and evil and there's like a black and white motif, like all the good guys wear white all the time and all the bad guys wear black all the time, that can come across as not only very stereotypical and very cliche, but if you're not careful, it can even cross over like the line over into like negative representation. So just be very thoughtful about making sure you're not getting into those cliches and stuff. So I think that brings us to our query for this month. Our query for this month is YA horror. And actually the movie sounds like the book sounds like something that Jordan Peele might actually be interested in making, which I would love to see. So Carly, cool. What are your thoughts on this query?
So to start with, I'm going to start with a very specific compliment. I am a big fan of how this author used comps. They picked very specific elements of the various stories that they're comping and showed how they combined to create something new. So they show what elements of the story this story has without saying just readers who liked X will like this. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That is perfectly fine to do, but I really appreciate the specificity. It really sets the expectations well. For the most part, I really love this query. My main notes were to kind of tighten up the introduction to the character. I wanted to get more to the main conflict of the story and how the main character will deal with it a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I mostly had compliments about this query. So Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, I love so much about this query. I feel like this story is exactly what I'm always telling writers to do, which is take a familiar trope, aka like playing the record backwards, giving you a secret message, I think is the familiar trope, and then give it new life. So this feels like something that I already sort of know, but also a fun modern take on it. We also have the like, be careful what you wish for vibe going on. But again, it's in the context of this motif. Yes, we have a motif in the query. Literally my only other complaint here is that I think the phrasing tattoo that wants her dead feels a little vague to me. And I think there may be a way to play with this with the next sentence, but that's really me getting very, very picky. Basically, I just really, really want to read this book like yesterday.
It sounds amazing.
It does.
All right. So next month for Valentine's Day, we will be watching the romantic comedy Bros. And we will also have another query or blurb critique. So if you want your query featured on the podcast, you can find the details about how to do that on our website or Twitter page.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com. You can also follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can support the show and get extra content at patreon.com/storychatradio. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at storychatradio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.